Welcome, everybody, to the third session of If You Can Keep It, the Fight for Democracy in America, the Civic Engagement and Leadership Development Series for Spring 2025. It will get started in just a few moments, but first, a few announcements. Today's program is the third installment in the five-part series for Civic Engagement and Leadership Development. You can find information about today's program in the chat. We're really happy to have all of our guest speakers with us. Next week is the fourth installment titled, Where is the Working Class Majority? From Demographic Destiny to Strategic Action, featuring guest speakers Javier Murillo, Erica Smiley from Jobs with Justice, Javier Murillo from Movement Voter Project, Lone Tran from Rising Majority, and moderated by the director of CELD, Dr. Alethea Jones, professor at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Some other upcoming events at CUNY SLU. Next week, Tuesday, March 25th, we'll have a virtual program titled Intersectional Organizing, Building Solidarity in the Labor and LGBTQIA+ Movements, featuring a great lineup of speakers, and that's part of the LGBTQI+ programming series hosted by the Murphy Institute at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. On Thursday, March 27th, Shifting South, Global Trade Union Discussion on the Energy Transition, sponsored by Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. This is also a virtual event. There will be interpretation in Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and we have a great lineup of speakers from Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, and other folks will be joining us as well. So we hope you can join us for that. In terms of announcements for the CELD program, if you haven't already, please register to receive follow-up emails. You'll see the link in the Zoom chat. For those of you interested in qualifying for a CELD leadership certificate, you probably know by now you must attend at least 4 sessions and complete at least 4 evaluations. We will share the link to all evaluation forms in the Zoom chat, so look out for that, and they come in follow-up emails as well. If you have any questions or suggestions, please email us at events@slu.cuny.edu. That email will be in the Zoom chat as well. And finally, if you've registered and you're receiving emails, you know that we're also sharing the raw video from each of the sessions a couple of days after the session. So we have the links to the video and transcript for session 1 and session 2. We'll drop those in the chat. And that's it for announcements. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to the director of the Civic Engagement and Leadership Development Program and distinguished lecturer at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, Dr. Alethea Jones.
Welcome, 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 everyone. It is so good to have you here, whether it's for the first time or you are joining us again as a faithful follower of this series. We so appreciate your presence. Over 550 folks have registered for these sessions, and we'll have access to the recording on YouTube if they're not able to attend live. For those of you who are returning, some of what I'm about to say might be familiar, but we'll get through it as quickly as possible so we can get to our exciting and wonderful panel. Well, I think this week brought an administration that took on the Pope on immigration, has taken on Columbia University, has taken on Ukraine, and the strategy of flooding the zone with multiple activities, including the closing of the Department of Education, continues, with much for us to discuss. And some of it, quite frankly, can feel overwhelming, which is part of the point and part of the strategy. This series, If You Can Keep It, the Fight for Democracy in America, offers conversations, reflections, and both historical perspective from a left labor point of view. We analyze these political developments to enhance our own understanding of what is happening today. It is provided to the general public free of charge. The Murphy Institute, which hosts this program, is a 501c3 educational institution. It's a part of CUNY and the School of Labor and Urban Studies. Today's discussion aligns with our purpose to facilitate informed dialogue with insights from practitioners who are dedicated to working class struggle. We can discuss political issues, but speakers cannot instruct the audience to take specific partisan political actions. We have received many of your questions, many of which align with the questions we have as moderators. And while no single session will address all of your questions, we hope that most of those questions will be addressed by the end of the series. I have a special thank you, of course, to the Murphy Public Engagement Team with Sarah, Nadia, and Michael for their excellent support. Last week, we were hosted by our guest moderator, Samir Santi, and his guests provided incredible historical perspective as well as astute insights to current developments. And this week, we're offering more of the same with our guest moderator, Professor Stephanie Luce. Today's topic is on the front lines of the School of Democracy. Stephanie has worked extensively with unions as an activist, as a researcher, as a teacher, and on campaigns such as free higher education and the fight for $15 and a union. Without further ado, I will turn the program over to Professor Stephanie Luce.
Okay, sorry, I was not allowed to unmute there for a minute. So welcome, everyone. Thanks so much, Alethea. It's wonderful to be here. And we're really honored to have our panelists today who are on the front lines of defending democracy, defending workers' rights, defending union rights. And we know that unions have historically been one of the main players to bring about democracy in the first place, to fight for workers to have the right to vote, to fight for everyone to engage in society. And often they're the first under attack when we bring in authoritarian, or when we see authoritarian or fascist regimes come to place, they go after labor unions. And at the same time, we also know we've never had a full democracy in this country, that we've won a lot of rights through struggle, but there was a lot more still to win. So our challenge right now is thinking about how unions and worker organizations can be on the front lines for not only defending what we've won, but really deepening it and extending what we mean by democracy. So I'm thrilled to have our three guests today who are longtime organizers, activists, and leaders in workers' rights movements. And I'm going to introduce them briefly and let them say more about themselves as well. And you can, we're going to also share some of their background in the chat to talk for you to follow up on our folks. So our first speaker today will be Jamala Rogers. She's a longtime activist, organizer, feminist, and political strategist with deep roots in the Black liberation movement. She's also serving on the executive committee of the organization Standing for Democracy. And I'll start with you, Jamala, to talk just to share a bit more about yourself and your work and your analysis of the moment we're in.
So thank you for having me. I think this is an important discussion to have, and we need more of them, but I don't want us to get stuck in the discussion phase, because often that's what happens, as opposed to let's talk about strategy and implementation. So, the Organization for Black Struggle, which I'm a founder of, has as its core working people and working class initiatives. And so having be grounded in that connects us with other folks. So, for example, we a longtime member of Missouri Jobs with Justice. I'm a part of the Workers' Rights Board. So we connect with other folks who, for them, working people and working people's issues are primary. One of the things for this particular period and the period before is, and I know we've talked a lot about the left and lack of a left and all, the jokes that go with that. But I think we do have to look at how we contributed to this period. and not that that is the main danger, because part of us not being as cohesive as we could have been, and I always believe in the saying, you prepare for war in times of peace, and we didn't do that very well, and so now we have this threat, and we are scrambling to try to see who we can unite with to really develop and create a formidable united front against fascism. And so that's where Standing for Democracy came in, because I know I was looking all around saying, do people see what I'm seeing? And I see like groups planning their programs as usual. I'm like, what? And there's not even a mention of anything in their program or in language that tells me that they understand what's getting ready to come down. And so I was just elated when folks started to talk about like what period we're in and what kind of formation do we need to have to address that. And so last year we launched the Standing for Democracy, and we started with 3 scenarios about what happens if. And that was very illuminating, because then it helped people to begin thinking about what could happen, not just nationally, but even in their respective cities. And so, I just think that we're at a place now where there's plenty of opportunities for organizing. My hope and some of my fear is that we don't let these adversaries of democracy run us raggedy with all the stuff that they're throwing at us, because as you said before, or maybe that was Alicia saying that that's part of their strategy, just run us raggedy and burn us out. So I think we have to be very strategic in how we organize ourselves, but then how we look at the threat that's in front of us.
Thanks so much, Jamala. I'm now going to introduce Shane Larson. Shane is the assistant to the president of the Communication Workers of America, or CWA. CWA is one of the unions that's been really on the forefront of fighting for democracy and making the point that this is central to unions, and unions need to do have a stake in it. CWA has also been innovative in terms of their worker education programs and bringing rank and file members into the union to get engaged in political activity. So we're really grateful to have you with us here today, Shane.
And then I had to find the mute. So thanks, Stephanie, and thanks to my fellow panelists, and thanks for everyone for joining and for the hosts for this important conversation. I'm so glad you guys are doing this. It's needed now more than ever. As Stephanie said, currently I'm serving as the assistant to the president at CWA. I've been with CWA since 2010 when I became the legislative director. Prior to that, I was at the Association of Flight Attendants for 11 years. And then before that, I spent 4 years with Senator Tom Daschle in the Senate and in South Dakota on his reelection campaign. But I've always had a real deep passion for these democracy issues, which is why I was really fortunate and lucky to be working for a union that's prioritized these issues as part of our core work. It was about 15 years ago, under the leadership of our then president, Larry Cohen, when CWA made a decision to really prioritize democracy reforms as part of our union-wide issue, focus, and our work. And really what brought us to that point was the fact that we were noticing more and more apathy from our best activists and our engaged membership on electoral politics, really due to the fact that they would work their butts off. They would do everything we asked them to do in terms of volunteering, canvassing, phone banking, letter writing, etc., but then would still be washed out in a lot of races by the wave of corporate money that would be coming in. Or were living in districts that were so extremely gerrymandered that they didn't get much of a response, or were unable to move their members of Congress. And they were just not seeing the issues that they cared the most about. Those core economic issues were being addressed by elected officials. And in cases like, really it came to a head with President Obama's election in 2008, we'd get a Democrat elected to the White House, we'd get control of Congress, yet we still couldn't move meaningful legislation to really address the working families and our members' concerns because of the Senate filibuster. So we really settled on fully engaging on the structural reforms to our democracy that were needed to make our democratic system more democratic. And we started getting rid of what we started calling the democracy blocks. Things like getting big money out of politics, ending gerrymandering, eliminating the filibuster, and a lot of other things. And we started going deep with so many of the great organizations that have been working in this space for decades and going deep with them. But the critical thing for us, and one of the other great things that I love about CWA, is the deep culture and practice in CWA and focus on member education programs. And so we started going deep with our members on the democracy blocks, what they were, helping connect the dots for them, that these were tools being used by the same corporate interests that were hijacking our economy and also now hijacking our democracy. And the most important piece, though, was that there was a way to fix them. There were proposals and policies that could be enacted if we engaged and elected the right people and held them accountable to get those reforms done. So it was amazing for me to see our members who went through these educational opportunities, who were not only moved to take action, but really with the zeal of the converted, really throwing down in a meaningful way. So, on one hand, it's taken about 15 years for the entire labor movement to really throw down in this place of focusing on democracy reforms, recognizing we're not going to make meaningful progress until we actually make our democracy work. And from folks viewing it as a do-gooder issue, to really the great part has been the entire constellation of the labor movement out of headquarters in DC or around the country have thrown down in a meaningful way on this fight, to where you saw the For the People Act and the other democracy reforms last year. The labor movement was one of the major players in trying to advance those pieces of legislation. But the reality is that we're in this mess today. We're in this moment of really scary times and backwards movement in our democracy, because not just union members, but as we've all seen, working class voters have taken this frustration with the lack of seeing any meaningful progress on their core economic issues, what motivating them, in turn turning to a strongman who they believe is going to shake up the system and finally deliver for them. Unfortunately, what we're all seeing is he's delivering for his buddy Elon Musk, and we don't need to go into all of that. But it's so important in this moment that labor continues to remain focused on the need to fix our democracy to be responsive to working people and union members. And we can't lose sight of that. Labor plays such an important and critical role in all of this in terms of our ability as unions to go deep with our member on education. And they're also, union members are important talkers in their communities with colleagues and friends and family, as important validators about these issues. And we can't lose sight of that when it comes to democracy. Union members get it in a core fundamental way, because unionism is all about democracy in the workplace. They vote on contracts, they vote on local elected. And some could even argue that the union labor movement is democratic to a fault at times. But they get it, and they're important validators and important foot soldiers in the work that we need to do. At this time last year, there was a real recognition that we needed to be prepared in case we were in the opposite place of where we are today, that we had control of the government, and to move quickly to pass the federal reform bills. And so we started going deep with developing a rank and file union member curriculum that would be delivered by rank and file union members, and that could be implemented through the AFL-CIO state feds and CLCs. But unfortunately, now we're in a place where that's sort of in a holding pattern. But we can't put that on hiatus at this moment. We need to continue explaining to our members how our system's been broken and what we need to do to take it back. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Shane. And next, we're going to hear from Jessica Tang. Jessica was a middle school social studies teacher in Boston and became president of the Boston Teachers Union, and is now serving as president of the American Federation of Teachers statewide union in Massachusetts. She's also served as a vice president with the National AFT. And I know Jessica's been very involved in democracy issues as well. And your presence is quite timely, given the news we have about the Department of Education. So welcome, Jessica.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I've long been very aware of the very intertwined nature of public education and democracy. And I think that is why teachers unions in authoritarian regimes are oftentimes the very first targets. So are university professors, and certainly the Department of Education being dismantling as part of the authoritarian, tactic. And I will get more into that. I mean, the top lines are one, it's illegal. Two, the justification that they're trying to return control to state and local governments is false because we already have control of the state and local governments. But what they are doing is gutting, they already gutted actually over 13,000 employees in the Department of Education, including the ones that anyone that does oversight, including the Office of Civil Rights, right? So that's what this is really about. It's not actually about returning control to anyone or, efficiencies and things like that. Things are going to be a lot less efficient, and it's the students who are going to be harmed, the most vulnerable. It's always the most vulnerable who are going to be harmed the most. But I'm going to start actually with just public education and why public education itself is really important to democracy. There's a lot of studies that show that there's a lot of involvement in teachers unions in the electoral process too, and there's a reason for it. Public education itself is a democratic institution. So whether that's exercising democracy at school committee races or electing school committee members, whether it's electing school site council members and parents, as part of the governing bodies of schools, there are a lot of ways in which through the public education process, you're able to exercise those democratic processes and get involved and speak up and have, public discourse and making decisions together. And then literally schools are a lot of times voting sites, right? And in addition to that, you've got your teachers unions, and similarly, teachers unions set up have structures in place to help us practice democratic muscles. Again, we elect our leaders, right? I had to run for office. Oftentimes actually teacher union leaders, we get elected by more people than even our city councilors or our state representatives, depending on the size of your unions. And we have regular meetings where we're using democratic governance, or we're supposed to be. I can't say we always do, but theoretically, especially in the public sector, we practice these democratic muscles often through our meetings and through our elections and through resolutions, and again making shared decisions together. And so that then enables us, I think, to participate in the electoral process more as well too. And then again, as teachers, we don't have a choice but to become political, because so many of the decisions that are made in the political realm impact literally what we do in our classrooms every single day, whether it's like the impact of the U.S. Department of Education and the threat of funding. It will result in overcrowded classrooms. It will result in many of our students not getting the protections they need and not getting equitable access to things that they haven't had access to historically for a lot of our marginalized communities. It will impact the policies that impact everything from being able to teach real history to having a reading specialist for students who have disabilities like dyslexia, right? And that's what we're seeing right now already. And so the last thing I'll kind of close with is it's not just teachers unions. It is the whole labor movement that is so critical in this moment of time, where we see the playbook of authoritarianism and democratic backsliding happening. It's not, again, is it going to happen? It is already happening. So many red lines have already been crossed, and there is no moment where it's like, oh, we're definitely in it. No, we are already in it. And I think more and more people need to recognize that we are in this critical moment in time where if we don't stop it now, we're going to be spending at least the next decade fighting back. And I have some sobering actually information to share, right? In the last 30 years, for democracies that have backslid into autocracy, only about 54% of them actually make it back out. And many of them right now are so inconclusive. And that's not a good statistic whatsoever. However, the good news is that movements that are seeking democracy against authoritarian rule between 1946 and 2006, the success rate of those movements with national trade participation was 83%. And the success of the rate of movements without national trade union participation was 29%. And so labor unions have to be right now on the front lines of fighting for our democracy. And we're well positioned to do this. Shane had mentioned, some of the reasons why, but again, we are uniquely positioned to be able to fight for democracy because we have a number of specific attributes. So, for example, generally high levels of public trust. People do tend to trust teachers still, right? You saw that in the last election, where even in the places that went red, the ballot initiatives that were on public education still won. We have clear channels for coordinating actions, and we have practiced doing that. We generally have stronger ties amongst our members than a lot of other institutions. We have a lot of deep networks and coalitions with local communities. We have an organized base, and we have the capacity to mobilize, and we have experienced leadership, and we have the capacity to exert economic leverage through non-cooperation, which is a huge piece, and also the ability to set public agendas and narratives, which we are able to do because if our members are out there messaging and doing the relational organizing we need in this moment, again, as trusted messengers, there's an important role to play. And so we need labor right now to come together across sectors and lead. And, it's certainly what we're doing at the AFT and trying to do, nationally, but it can't just be teachers. It's got to be trade unionists. It's got to be people across sectors, not the usual suspects. And that's work we need to be fully all hands on deck doing right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So I want to ask all three of you to go a little deeper on this. We know a lot of union members voted for Trump. Some union members didn't vote at all. Lots of working class people didn't vote at all. People are very cynical and think, I knocked on a lot of doors and people said, I just get the same promises every time. Why should I bother? People are getting misinformation or disinformation. Are there checking into completely alternate sources of media. So how do we reach people? How are you reaching your members? How are we reaching non-union folks? And alongside that, like this tension about how to even talk about democracy alongside economic issues, racial justice issues, immigrant rights issues. What are some strategies for rebuilding our base of support? Big question. Who would like to go first? Jamal?
Two things for me is I always tell people when I'm doing training or talking that your organizations, whether it be a union or a community-based organization, is a laboratory for practicing democracy. So if you're not doing it there, it's probably going to be hard for you to look at what's wrong with the bigger structure, because sometimes we engage in anti-democratic practices in our organizations. The other thing is the way that we tend to organize is using elections as the destination as opposed to it's part of a larger strategy. That is the thing that's really, I think, killing us in terms of our relationship with base building and educating, because if we say electing a Barack Obama is where the end and everything's going to be fine, then when he doesn't do what he's supposed to do or things don't really change, then it's like, well, what was that all about? As a very young organizer in the Congress of African People, and this was back in the early 70s, we were taught that we were supposed to make the system, we were supposed to organize people so that they understood that the system is corrupt and unworkable. So when you have that framework, then you are organizing for something much bigger, and you're looking at an alternative to capitalism. And so I think for me, that's been part of my DNA, is like, no, it's not going to work for us. But in the meantime, how can we have some policies and legislation in place that's going to ease the suffering for working class people until we get to where we're going, until we can figure out what really do we want? What do we really want democracy to look like? And so when I think about vast disillusionment with the system, particularly around young people who will say, why are you all, why you old folks, you OGs continue to prop up this system? So then you have to explain to them, we're building power on the way. This is not the election of candidate A or even ballot B is not the end game. We are building a democracy so that you become a powerful leader in your community and understand how all these dots come together. Because when I'm hearing Jessica talk about what's going on with the union, which used to be my union, and so I'm still connected to AFT. In fact, we just did a meeting yesterday. The same billionaires that are going after that part of democracy on the federal level are coming after the schools. So we got a bunch of candidates that have been paid for by Opportunity Trust to make this a charter school as opposed to public schools. So if we don't connect the dots for people to say the same people, let's be clear on who it is, then I think that hampers our ability to reach people and keep them engaged and inspired by our movement, by our activities, not what's going on with the crazy people.
Thank you.
I totally agree with that. It's like organizing 101, right? We have to meet people where they're at. We need to figure out what they care about, what issues they care about, and then help connect the dots back to, well, what they care about is being harmed by these same actors and players that are also undermining democracy. And so that's a lot of the work we're trying to figure out how to do, for us, it's like, all right, with educators, first of all, not all the educators even know what the Department of Education does. So the first step was actually just like making sure that we got the information out is like, hey, here's what's at stake with the Department of Education, right? And then it's like, okay, but what's happening in Department of Education goes hand in hand with what's happened in higher ed and the federal workers and even USAID. And, and then, they all, if we're looking at this from like, our immediate classroom focus is all hurting our students and communities too, right? And so then, okay, well, what are we going to do about it then? Okay, well, then we need to know, well, who's causing the harm? And then, just working it up and trying to connect all those dots. But, what we know doesn't work, and I think this comes from like studying also like just social science, is like attacking people like either because of their party or like affiliation or like being judgmental or self-righteous, right? What we know is actually, you start with kindness and you start with building a relationship and then building trust, and then you're able to get to the deeper pieces that actually can help to change someone's opinion. And it takes time and takes a lot of work, and it takes organizing and relationship building. And those are the skill sets we need to be building too.
Jessica stole almost everything I was going to say. So ditto to what Jessica said. But I just want to put a finer point on one thing, which is, and I know I find myself doing this of wanting to yell, WTF, why did you vote for this guy? Or to be like, as you're seeing people, the harm impacting people right now of, well, this is what you voted for, the lectury sort of. But as Jessica said, we've got to meet them where they are. And we have to understand that a lot of them were motivated by a real frustration of rising costs, the inability for Democrats to really focus on the core economic issues or to be able to communicate that, and just recognize that their pain is real. And try to work with them. One of the things we're working on right now in CWA is one of our more conservative elements in the union are our telecom membership, segments of our telecom membership. And we've got some great opportunities coming from the Biden administration in the broadband build-out monies. But what's going on right now is Musk and others are trying to reprioritize that funding to go to Starlink. and satellite services, which is a direct threat to our members' jobs and especially to union jobs in the industry. And so and what we've learned is, even though our initial feeling at the headquarters was to be like Musk and Trump are coming to destroy your jobs, we tested it with some of our folks and they're like, don't lead with Trump or Musk. Lead with, they're trying to change. People in Washington are trying to change, to start the conversation. So I just end it with where Jessica mentioned, which is meet them where they are, recognize their frustrations, and then we've got several years of engaging with them. This Republican budget fight is going to be numerous opportunities for us to be able to demonstrate. And for unions, we are a trusted information source for these members. They see us because they know the union is them. So we just need to be having these conversations in the workplaces, in our unions over the next several years. And again, meeting them where they are.
Great. And just, I'm going to get a little more concrete with each or whoever wants to answer this. Just sharing for other people on the call who might be trying to figure out what to do. When you say, all three of you talked about reaching out to people, are you talking about phone banking? Are you talking about training stewards to talk to members? Are you talking about door knocking? Are these actions and protests? All of the above? If there's anything concrete, curriculum, anything concrete you want to add to what you just shared?
I mean,
So I can't, go ahead,
no,
Jessica.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So I can't help but think about when I see Shane in the Communications Work of America, because several years ago, the Organization for Black Struggle received a AFL-CIO grant under LIFT. And what that did was you're supposed to pair a union with a community-based organization. And so we paired with CWA, the local here, 6355. And I just feel in my heart of hearts that that work that we did to fortify the membership and to deal with deception, paycheck deception and all of that, really prepare them for the fight that they're having right now. So when I hear about Natasha Pickens being at the State House, I know where that is, I know what she's doing, but I don't see those kind of partnerships happening the way they should. Sometimes the unions are only organizing within their union, and and part of that may just be capacity in terms of reaching out. That's why I think formations like Jobs with Justice is so important, because you're bringing in not just unions, you're bringing in faith leaders, you're bringing in community folks, you're bringing in elected officials, so that we're all thinking and working together on some of the same issues. So for us, it's all of the above, Stephanie, but just recently we started a political education sessions, because what we have seen is that we are not as astute as we need to be on some of these ideological and political issues. And so that impacts our ability to organize. So we don't have a common analysis. We're not using, common language. It's very difficult to have a conversation about what's going on in the world. So I think we just have to, come outside of our comfort zones. And as Jessica said, there are people that we normally may not be coalescing with that we need to reach out to, because some of the unions, we know where they are landing. We've seen the endorsements. And so that may not be a place where I could have some input, because I'm not in those unions, but I keep encouraging unions to do some cross-fertilization. They already know sort of who's going to be on this side and that side. Can we come in the middle to really talk about workers' power, worker struggles, which is what we're supposed to be about?
I would say ditto to all of the above. We have to be doing all of it. We have to give our core progressive activists an outlet to channel their energy, but we also need to be focused on having the conversations with our members who voted for Donald Trump. What we are really processing and focusing on is re-engaging and especially on the member education piece of things, of going deep. COVID set us back on so many levels. These sorts of trainings this member education stuff is best done in person, to be able to have those real conversations with people together in a room. And one of the side effects of COVID, the pandemic that we have seen is that it allowed us all to sort of continue to self-segregate politically, go back to our own corners and sort of isolate. And we, at least for our activists, they're rusty with having the conversations in the workplace with somebody who approaches politics differently. And so they're also afraid because our politics have become so much more aggressive. And so what we've really realized is that in this moment, we've got to get back to the basics of empowering our members, giving them the comfort and the training to be able to have these sorts of conversations in the workplace, and to help steer the conversations back to the core economic issues. And again, to be talking about how our democracy is broken, and that if we can focus on fixing our democracy, we can see some real meaningful movement on those core economic issues.
And this time, Shane stole a lot of things I was going to say. And what I'll add is I think about this honestly kind of two ways. One, as a teacher. So in teaching, we have to differentiate our instruction, right? We have to meet all of our learners wherever they're at and make sure that each one of them has an opportunity to learn and grow from where they're at. And also I think about this in the lens of like an escalation campaign, right? In a contract escalation campaign. And so we have to do all of the above, and we have to exercise the muscles, but people are different places, right? You got some activist unions like Chicago where they got some really strong muscles, they're the people when you go in the gym, you're like, ooh, intimidating, right? And then you got other locals that like are just starting. And so those locals may need to start actually with just the member engagement and the member education and the skill building. And so similarly, when you have a contract campaign, it's like, all right, at first, can we all at least wear the same color on the same day? Can we all wear a sticker or a button? And then can we start, when we get comfortable, can you attend a picket or a rally, right? Can you then take the next step? But all of these things have to be kind of happening at the same time right now. But we also have to help that skill building, because the truth is a lot of our unions, a lot of our teachers, they're not necessarily organizers. They don't know how to necessarily do a one-to-one conversation. They don't know how to build a coalition. They don't know how to like work in a coalition and actually share power too. Right. And so these are all different muscles that we need to exercise, but depending on where your local is and kind of assessing where that local is, you might need different specific actions or asks. And so I think giving a menu of ways that different people can plug in is one way to like kind of differentiate activism.
And Jessica, you know that as a teacher, you're also looking at multiple intelligence and also like learning styles when you organize it. So I don't see as much as that in the broader movement, that we sort of use one way and then think everybody's going to gravitate toward that, and they don't.
Yeah, that's right.
Stephanie, can I add one thing? Jessica made me think of this in her remarks, is that one of the things too that was a bad impact of the pandemic is that community-minded coalition building unions like CWA, AFT, and others, we've got to get back to growing, cross-pollinating. We need to get back to our activists going deep with other activists in the progressive space. And again, those are the sorts of things that need to happen in person. And so really focusing on the movement building piece of things and strengthening our movement by making folks get out of their silos and fight together. And this is one of the bright spots in this moment, for me at least, is seeing people in the communities of, one, being reminded how important that sense of community is for people right now, and creating those opportunities, especially in person, creating those opportunities for a sense of community and coalition building and movement building together, I think is really important. And we're really trying to re-engage in that space in our union as well.
That's great. Yeah. And people who have used the bargaining for the common good approach to say like, okay, broadband affects not just jobs for CWA members, but also community members who need access to those services. And certainly that's something we see in teaching. So thinking about that, we're all right now in such defensive battles. The attacks are coming from all sides, but thinking about that point, Shane, is like, how are we also going on the offense by building longer term alliances, building more power down the road. One of the unions that has made a pitch for that kind of longer term solidarity coming out of the United Auto Workers, calling on unions to coordinate contracts to expire in 2028. And whether that means, that's not going to happen for all unions. Not everyone can strike or can align, but we know the AFT has endorsed that call to the extent possible. And that's also a call that says maybe we also work in alignment with community organizations around some of these key demands that are healthcare, pensions, shorter work week. These are contract demands that we can demand from our employers, but they also might be legislative demands that we can demand from our politicians. So whether it's the 2028 plan that Jessica, I know your union is signed on to, or other kinds of longer term power building approaches that say, hey, none of us can win our demands alone. We can only win these together. I'm curious some of your thoughts on how we go on offense with these longer term strategies.
So I'm not going to lie. I actually think in this moment, if we don't all as a labor movement coalesce around the fundamental fight for just our democracy, that the ability actually to be able to negotiate contracts and have collective bargaining at all is questionable. And we see what's happening at the NLRB and just like the gutting of collective bargaining rights. And I am really worried actually about that. And again, I think that goes hand in hand with all the other fights that we're fighting, whether it's for immigration, for housing, for racial justice, for basically any kind of civil rights. If we don't have a democracy to be able to fight for those things, a lot of things I think we've taken for granted for too long, then we're missing the bigger picture. But the good news is when we're fighting for democracy together, then that actually builds the relationships that we need to have more of the coalition bargaining that helps workers on the offense, right? Because we're doing both right now. One, we're trying to save democracy. But on the other hand, we can't lose sight of the vision of what we're for. And we have to be, kind of forward thinking too of then, okay, now we're building strong relationships together in this fight, and that actually sets us up in a stronger way to then fight for the things that we should have had been fighting for had we not have this like autocratic backsliding happening.
So
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Jamala.
I was thinking about what Jessica said when she put out what some people might say an alarmist view. And I struggle with that. Like how deep do we go to say where this thing could go so that people don't say, well, shit, what's the point? And balance that with like, no, here's some things that we actually can do right now. And I know going across the country, there is legislation that's actually criminalizing protest and assembly. And so we have like limited time to do some of this stuff, Jessica. And so I'm all for what you said, but also encouraging people to step outside of the box. So when I heard about this whole bargaining thing of trying to pull people together to do it together, I'm like, that's the kind of thinking that we have to have right now. We can't be doing the same sort of old traditional stuff because it's not going to work. And so for me, it's like, what can we do new and different that's going to have a real impact? And so I've been really pushing back against just having mobilizations because they take a lot of energy and resources if they're not connected to a strategy or if they're not connected to a disruption of capital in some way. So yeah, I think we are at a place where we have to think differently. I'm even thinking, and this is different for me, thinking about why did those people vote for Trump? Because at one point we were able to say only, the white working class was drawn to that. But now in this election, we saw that they were Latinas, they were Black folks, some of those Black people in my family. So now you have to like, okay, what happened here? And what what do we need to be doing differently and thinking differently, and what can our narrative be right now, because people are disengaged, but they're also disillusioned with the system. And all of us are disillusioned with the system. It's not meeting anybody's needs but the billionaires. So what connector could we use to have a conversation with people who are also disillusioned, just in a different way? And so I think we need to be looking at new ways of engaging people, new ways of organizing people, because even some of the traditional folks don't know what to do right now. We got a convicted felon and a sexual predator in the White House who is trashing the Constitution, but also ignoring court rulings. What do you do with a president that's in contempt? Nobody seems to know. So I say, well, they're trying to figure this out. We better be clear on what we're supposed to do and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit negative for a second in that we appreciate what UAW is doing and trying to find the alignment on May Day of 2028. And I think it's really critical that we all, the labor movement as a whole, come together to really help tell that story and demonstrate. And that is an important effort. But what I'm worried about is something Jessica said, which is, are we going to have contracts in 4 years? With what this administration did for the TSA agents is horrifying. It is our Patco moment right now today, that we have had the Department of Homeland Security basically just say, your contract doesn't exist. We're going to ignore it. We're going to throw it away. We're going to stop withholding dues. You don't have a union anymore. If they get away with that, what's to stop corporate America from doing the exact same thing in this moment? So we're also just a little frustrated. I know that we're all in our defensive crouches right now as we're constantly being inundated with all these attacks. But what's happening with the TSA agents needs to be a clarifying moment. I think the entire labor movement needs to stand up and say, no, this is the line in the sand. Because if they can just destroy a collective bargaining agreement willy-nilly just by fiat, is really scary. And so that focusing right now on the fight back is so important to build that power, to make sure we have something to fight for in 4 years. So sorry to be alarmist and very negative, but we're in that moment.
I guess I'm alarmist too, but the thing is, May 1st is an inflection point, right?
Yes.
It's an opportunity to bring people together who may not always have been working together, and whether it's fighting for a contract campaign, or connecting what they're fighting for in a contract campaign to the barriers to getting that contract and linking that back to democracy. There's plenty, I think, of room of connecting those dots. But I think movements like, May 1st help to create the inflection points to bring people together and find that common cause and common language, common analysis, so that more people are joining the movement.
Yeah, so I think probably we all agree, like, it's urgent. We need to act now, and we need to act next year, and we need to act the year after, because the it's going to be a long fight and an immediate fight. And on that note, we could start with the Chicago Teachers Union is calling for actions this May Day, which will bring together coalitions of forces in cities around the country. So that is going to the immediate. What are some immediate steps and actions that you all want to share? We know that there's a number of different actions and protests. What are the things, the urgent tasks that people on this webinar can take part in? What would you like to call them to do?
Well, I'll just really quickly mention two. One is on April 5th, there's under the umbrella of hands off our Social Security, hands off our job, hands off our collective bargaining agreements. There'll be rallies in cities all across the country. I think the website is handsoff2025.com, I think. But there will be a number of progressive organizations, and some unions have endorsed that. So there'll be great opportunities for people to rally. And then look for opportunities. There's a real coordination effort happening for the next congressional recess, which will be 2 weeks in April, of folks to really make their voices heard, to especially harass the Republicans who are terrified of having town hall meetings in this moment, to really make voices heard back home in communities with the electeds.
I was also going to share April 5th is definitely a key date coming up. But also even before then, I know the federal postal workers are having a day of action. I want to say it's on the 23rd, but it's dispersed, so it's not one place. It's several places and a national day of action. There's Tesla takedowns happening all the time. I think again, it depends on, what are you most comfortable with right now? And then can you make yourself a little more uncomfortable and try the new thing? So, for some people it's really hard actually just to get on the phone and call a legislator. But then, once you get comfortable with that, all right, what's the next thing that you can do? And also April 8th is going to be a higher ed day of action. And we're trying to combine, higher ed and K-12, again, start building intentional, coalition. And of course, then May Day as well. So, thanks for putting that in there. Yep, the U.S. Mail Not for Sale event and National Day of Action. But, we've got to have intersectional organizing right now. And that means teachers showing up for postal workers and, postal workers showing up for higher ed and higher ed, showing up for the federal workers. This is the moment we all need to see our common cause and our common enemies too.
I definitely agree. I saw a lot of solidarity yesterday at the APWU rally. You had Teamsters there, you had, NAACP, you had a number of folks. So that's starting to happen. I guess one of the concerns I always have is people's capacity, even if they want to do it, they just don't have the capacity to show up for all of these different fights. And that's why I keep going back to let's be strategic and how can we have a unified effort where all of us come together and show our strength in a couple of places. Even in terms of standing for democracy, it's national now, but we are creating local organizing committees, and St. Louis just had its first meeting a couple of weeks ago. So people should be looking for folks who are talking about building united fronts against fascism, pro-democracy groups to see, okay, what are you all doing and how are you connected with other people? Again, we are going to have to draw people into us and do it in very creative ways so that they feel like it's going to be worth their time and energy.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm going to start moving us to, we'll get Standing for Democracy shared in the website and the chat. And I'm going to start moving to some audience questions. And so we have a couple questions here about media and access to information. And so Nurul says, thanks for speaking. Are unions and allied organizations open to funding and supporting independent media forms to counter all the corporate and right-wing platforms? And Ami Javeri adds to that. I second Nurul's question. Considering the right has used media offensively and building on the fact that unions still have high levels of public trust, offering independent media and reporting seems integral to our strategy or to our struggle, whether focused locally or nationally or both. So any of you have a thought on that, unions and independent media?
I mean, I know for a fact AFT is already funding a lot of new and existing independent media sources and knows the importance of that. I've seen a list and some of the projects that they're working on, that we're working on. And I will say, and some of, again, our best messengers are our union members themselves. Unions are a trusted source of information for a lot of our members. And I know I did a very informal poll of my members of and leaders actually of where they got their information. And it actually was the union. And so we actually, as unions, I think really have to think about how we're improving our communications to our own members too, because we have that ability to do the political education and popular education that's needed in this moment.
Yeah, I remember reading studies about that union newsletters are a big factor. Yeah, and actually here at CUNY, we have a school of journalism. So our faculty and staff in that school are AFT members. So Jamala or Shane,
I was
any?
going to say, I think some of the bigger unions who have comms departments are able to move and be nimble that, but some smaller unions don't have that ability, and neither do some community groups. And so I would like to see some of them come together with a communication strategy, because one thing I know that we haven't done well, and that is, a narrative that's clear and concise for our constituents, much unlike what the opposite folks have done. I mean, they got those folks rallied around something and all of them speaking the same thing. They might say it in a different way, but it's a very simple kind of a narrative. And I think we've not been successful in doing that. So I would like to see some of those comms folks come together where we talk about, even in a particular locality, what do we need to talk about in St. Louis that would resonate with people, or with Chicago or DC?
So I would just have to say is working for a union that represents a significant number of journalists. Yes, we need to do this, but it's another one of those all of the above moments of supporting independent journalism. We've been supportive of Capital in Maine. If folks haven't checked out that publication outlet, it's a great source of economic news for working class folks. But we also need to be, besides growing that ecosphere, we need to make sure we're protecting public broadcasting, which is on the chopping block as well. Marjorie Taylor Greene's focused on it in congressional hearings. A lot of union workers there, but an important voice in so many communities. And also, we've been talking about this, the News Guild at CWA has been talking about this for years now, is we've got to find ways to address the growing news deserts in this country. That there's so many places in this country that people do not have any source for local news. And that's just getting worse as we see more and more corporate consolidation, especially in local regional news. So we need to be supporting and growing the independent media space, but also fighting to protect those smaller publications and things like public broadcasting as well.
We have a related question from Guy Bosworth who says, what role does social media play in all of these topics we're talking about? For good and for bad, I guess.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
We have to be there. We've seen how the right has been able to manipulate that echo chamber of social media so effectively. And so our side needs to very much engage in that place. I wish we were seeing more. I've been seeing a lot of members of Congress recognizing, Democratic members of Congress recognizing they need to be more engaged on TikTok or, the little short videos that get people's attention. But I don't want to see the members of Congress talking to me about how bad things are or what they're doing to fight back. I want to see them lifting up the members, the workers in their communities who have been impacted by the DOGE cuts, lifting up the Park Service ranger who's wanted to do this his whole life, who helps your kids on the guided tours in the summer. And now he's unemployed and his wife is unemployed and they may lose their house. We need to see more of that in the social media space, of the real people who are being harmed by Trump and the Republican efforts. And not the talking heads or not the politicians themselves, but using their platforms to lift up the people who are being harmed.
But it can be an effective tool for everyday people too, because again, relational organizing, someone might not be able to hear something from an elected leader, but could hear it from their childhood friend who they went to high school with and grew up with, and know and trust a little bit more to hear some of this information.
Yeah, I did a study actually of the Writers Guild organizing, and I was so surprised to learn how many young organizers learn about unions at all through social media, and then learn the steps of how to unionize through social media. It's really encouraging, great to know that you can just contact someone and get the information you need. But clearly there's just not enough of that out there. There are not enough social media influencers, they're called, to kind of counter the other side. And related to that is a question from Warren Whitlock. To what extent are we working to recruit next gen adherents to the movement? It seems that young people, approximately 17 to 30 years old, need to be engaged and educated to the importance of the movement, and the movement needs to better understand the needs of this cohort. In addition to the shame of the actions currently underway in DC, is that so many folks who are against these actions did not engage in the last election. I'm game to engage in a serious effort on this front. Thank you.
Yeah, it's needed. I was actually just listening, I think it was NPR last night, to this whole series on basically how we have a huge population of disaffected young men and how they've gravitated, unfortunately, in my opinion, to like the um, Joe Rogan type of podcast and the manosphere that does not have a lot of diversity of viewpoints right now. And that has to be addressed somehow. And, you know, if the reality is a certain major part of our population is not getting their news through legacy media and other places, but are getting it through, you know, YouTube and podcasts and things like that, that we have to adapt to that.
And Alex couldn't make it, so I don't, that's why I was trying to offer an alternative.
Um, sorry, Jamala, were you?
No, I was just thinking about the social media thing, because a lot of our folks are into social media, and sometimes even when you have access, maybe your phone service is down where you can't access it. So I just think we have to have multiple ways of reaching our people, and not just social media. I agree with Jessica. It is a double-edged sword, because that's where everything is coming, and you have to filter through what's real and what's fake, which is labor intensive as well. So I think if we could communicate to people what a trusted source is, and they forget about all the other stuff and go there, then we'll probably be better off. But we need to strengthen those particular outlets.
Yeah, agreed. And meet people where young people are at in terms of where they're consuming information too. And making sure young people are part of the conversations too, because they need to be at the table actually to be a part of the strategizing.
Yeah.
They're gonna know where their peers are.
Yeah, have the young, in the labor movement, have the young workers leading the conversations with the young workers.
Yeah.
So this is one of the challenges with this is it's similar within climate work, which is I think trying to be educate and get information out there without being overly people getting overwhelmed with depression, right? Like feeling like there's nothing that can be done. And so Amy H asks, I understand the problem with being alarmist, but there is a place for it to help underline the seriousness of this time. How to balance talking about the dangerous times without discouraging and freaking people out. Hard questions for you.
Amy H, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
So
It is. I mean,
have to speak truth to power, but I think what is missing often is like, don't do this, this is happening, but we don't say, here's the alternative, or here's how you could be engaged. And so that has to be very concrete and and multiple ways of people to get engaged that we don't often offer. One of the things that some of us have joined the national boycott against Target stores because of their reneging on DEI, particularly around the George Floyd killing, and their base, their national headquarters is right there in Minneapolis, which is why they, you know, committed the $2 billion. Well, on their website, they have like a ticker tape of who you can buy from instead of Target. So that to me is kind of unique and different, because we say, don't buy here, don't buy here. But they were like, okay, where am I supposed to get my eggs from? Where am I supposed? So that ticker tape to me was just like, it was priceless. So that kind of stuff I think we have to start doing.
I totally agree. And it reminds me of someone said yesterday, a teacher who said that, you know, I teach about the bad parts of history, but I always teach an example of successful resistance too, or how that, you know, bad history was overcome, so that, you know, yes, this is a bad thing. You need to know about it. It's reality, it's truth. And here's the inspiration that it can be overcome. So when I was kind of alarmist earlier about how like 54% of democracies are able to, you know, recover and U-turn, they do come back stronger. And they can, they can, especially when labor is involved, can fight back and win, right? So it's maybe that both and to Jamala's point, got to tell the truth and show the hope.
And we've got lessons from the past to demonstrate how we've been in bad spots in the past and how we've how we've worked together to get through those. That's why, again, I'm such a huge believer in the sort of the member education, popular education piece of things, of like a lot of the work the education that we do tells the story from the past, and how we have, every time that we have come together to build mass movements to fight back, we've succeeded in moving forward. And so this is one of those moments where we need to draw on the lessons from the past and remind folks that we've been in dark days before. Then these are pretty dark, but there is a path forward. And if we can focus on learning from the past, what's worked in the past, there is a path forward to, as Jessica said, give them hope.
Great. So a couple of questions deal, I think, with similar themes about the executive power and also kind of our room to move at the federal level and law. Sarah's asking, why won't American labor unions come together to pursue change to national law, starting with getting rid of at-will employment and making it necessary for the employer to have just cause in order to fire employees? And in fact, the labor movement has long tried to adjust, to affect labor law with the PRO Act, the Employee Free Choice Act. It just never is able to get very far. So the thoughts of advancing labor law reform in this moment seem very far-fetched indeed. But your thoughts on labor law and where we are in terms of legal strategies in this moment?
I mean, AFT's done a number of lawsuits right now, and some of them have been successful, like the Social Security one. That was a big win, and that was around the data collection of data, and DOJ needs to destroy what they collected. However, I don't trust that they'll actually do that. But I think the legal recourse right now, honestly, for me, I think it's buying us time, but it's not going to be what saves us. And again, it's one of those things where we have to protect what we can protect right now, but also be proactive for the future. And where we can win in the short term, we absolutely should. So if we're in a blue state, we should continue to show like what's possible and do that work and be proactive. And in the larger, bigger picture, a lot of the federal legal fights, I don't think we can count on the moment alone. They're buying us some time, but the real work needs to be organizing and honestly helping people to get comfortable with massive non-compliance.
Yeah.
That's going to be what's needed in this moment when the Trump and DOJ and Musk continue to ignore federal rulings.
Yeah. We need to stay focused on identifying those important labor law reforms that are needed, even though we're not in a place of power to be able to enact those reforms. But something to celebrate is the PRO Act, which has sort of been our touchstone for the last number of years on federal labor law reform for the NLRA. Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona was not a co-sponsor of the bill. And because of the work that the labor movement and others have done in the progressive community to sort of make support for the PRO Act a litmus test, it was one of the reasons why he was, it really became a major issue when he was on the short list for VP of why Harris shouldn't pick him, because he was not supportive of the PRO Act. They've reintroduced the PRO Act in Congress. Mark Kelly is a co-sponsor of the PRO Act because of that organizing work that's been done. So we need to continue doing that work in this moment. But we also need to be prepared for the fact that with these Musk lawsuits coming up through the courts, we may not have an NLRB or an NLRA at some point in the immediate future, which brings us back to what we need to be doing regardless of the law is organizing workers. We've got a lot of models out there of non-majority union organizing, of working in Colorado, in Denver, we work to organize. Even though there's no collective bargaining rights, there were no collective bargaining rights for public sector workers in the libraries in Denver, organizing the workers to fight for themselves, who were then able to push forward a ballot initiative in Denver in the last election that expanded collective bargaining rights for municipal workers. So we need to continue, even though they may not have collective bargaining rights. We have a model of the alphabet workers in CWA who don't have collective bargaining rights, but have voluntarily paying dues into the union to come together to organize and continue organizing workers. And so that's really, we got to keep organizing. You may not have collective bargaining rights, but organizing the workers to prepare for those moments to advance the ball.
So to the point about education, I think is critical. But one of the things that I'm seeing, particularly the way that the slashing and burning is going down, is like most people don't understand the significance of this dismantlement. And so we have to be able to say, with all the oversight, that was the first to be like dismantled, all the oversight agencies. That's where our power was, that those watchdogs were looking out for us. If they're not there, who's looking out for us? But when you talk to people and you say, for example, the NRB has been like, you know, or even FEMA has been dismantled, or, you know, tax on them. They see FEMA only with catastrophes, but it has a pretty broad scope of work. So I think connecting people with like, what does it mean when these folks are not there for us? Those were the inside-outside game that we relied on, and what happens when they're not there, and which means the onus is on us to really do two jobs at the same time, and what that's going to mean. So part of it is like the civic education about how government works and what these departments actually do for us is also part of the popular education about organizing.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have a couple questions from Jim Dinkman, who he's getting at both like the seriousness of the moment now of, you know, Trump is invoking the Alien Sedition Act of 1798 to justify deportations, and that is opening up possibilities for him to assert really authoritarian rule. It also, you know, he's bringing up that we're on the edge of a constitutional crisis. And, you know, also the point of, is it that perhaps the Democratic Party needs to go through the process akin to what happened when the Whig Party dissolved and the Republican Party rose in the 1850s? Is there a need for a mass grassroots from the bottom renovation for the electoral possibilities going forward?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question, but it brings me back to the organizing, and not just organizing workers into a union, but organizing us collectively as a movement. And I've heard a lot of people talking about how we're in a de-alignment moment in the country, not a realignment yet, but a de-alignment. And that means we've got an opportunity, especially looking at people like Dan Osborne, who ran for the Senate from Nebraska, ran as an independent and way outperformed Kamala Harris in the state. And so those are the sorts of things that we're in this moment. We need to be organizing and talking about those opportunities to sort of make sure that our issues are getting addressed and that we're running the right kind of candidates.
But I see people think that the Democratic Party as it is now, particularly the traditional leadership has really buckled down, you know, under the new administration, and pretty much running scared. So we can't really depend on them for standing up for them. But there are some Democrats there that are doing that, and how we support them, and how we and not just support them financially, but, you know, this is hard work. I know in our state legislature, it's a trifecta. So the Republicans control the Senate and the House, and there's a Republican governor. And so it seems like all is lost. But, you know, there is a need for people to be there agitating and educating folks and reaching across the aisle to see who they can align with around particular issues. So I don't, you know, there's this whole thing about, you know, F the Democrats too. Well, at this point, we got a two-party system. Many of us don't like that, but we have yet to come up with a third party, even if it's a Labor Party, even if it's, I mean, the Green Party and all of that, but we don't have a viable party. So I know for me, I don't want to spend a lot of time with trying to embolden the weak-kneed people there. You know, I know that there's folks that are speaking out, but there's got to be a way, because this is what it is. This is the reality that they're there. And we have to figure out ways to either make them feel some pressure from us, which I don't know that they do. I'm talking about like the whole progressive radical movement. I don't know that they fear us like they would fear Elon Musk, who says, you don't do what we say, we're going to run somebody against you. I mean, that's probably pretty pretty scary, because he's got the money to do that. We can't make that threat, but certainly we can do some other things to help get our message across, either in a loving way or a pressurized way.
Yeah, I can just add that, you know, I think about this a lot because in Massachusetts we have like, you know, Democratic governor, House, Senate, and people do still feel very frustrated here that a working people's agenda is not the priority like in reality in a lot of ways. And so I do think that overall the whole electoral system, whether it be the electoral college, needs to be fixed, like the two-party system. But in the meantime, there are, I think, movements that are working even within the Democratic Party. For example, you know, the Working Families Party has been able to make some real impacts and moves, and so have been in conversations with what that might look like here in Massachusetts to help make sure that the working people's agenda is the priority agenda. Going back to what Shane started with is that, you know, a lot of the frustrations that people have are real frustrations, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's real because if you look at the facts, right, you know, the CEO salaries are going up exponentially, and regular everyday people's wages have actually, you know, really declined. And if you're factoring inflation, right? And so the middle class is decreasing, and clearly people feel frustration because it's not fake, it's real. And we don't have enough policies that are actually addressing the rising income inequality and the lack of living wages and just basic housing, medical access, food, and of course education.
Thank you. All right, we just have a few minutes left, and I just want to share a comment from Julie, who says she really agrees with the need for political education and popular education, and she's lifting up how we can create spaces in our unions to talk about what should democracy stand for and how to find common cause. And she says, my union, the PSC CUNY, which is also my union, is creating working groups for members to work on specific threats and breakage so as to come together to support and protect our communities. And those groups can be a good place for more education on the economy, labor history, and so forth. So, I'm gonna, one last question from John Knight, who asks what spaces exist to talk more about deeper democracy, workplace democracy, worker ownership, or public policy to give workers the right of first refusal for any sale of business, or establishing worker democracy as a functional governance model to challenge the oligarchy. So these are some big questions and thoughts to end with. I'm just going to say, if you all want to just take 1 or 2 minutes for closing thoughts, either to those themes or something you wanted to share before we wrap up.
So those kind of working groups are really important. I would hope and encourage people to open them up to community people, maybe not just CUNY, because I think sometimes it's easier for people to just deal with the folks they know, and then but if you say, here's when we're going to do this, and it's open to, you know, the general public, I think that's one way to do that. But, you know, out of the Ferguson uprising, here came this whole thing, and the whole damn system is guilty as hell, and it's true. But again, in the meantime, in between time, we have to figure out how can we make it safe and workable for the families, that the majority of us that are here. And the only way to do that is for us to reach out, to coalesce with people that normally we wouldn't even have thought about doing it. But it's going to be so crucial going forward. And the quicker we do it, the better. And I think about in the Chinese calendar, this is the year of the snake. So we need to be shedding all of that negative stuff, all this stuff we hanging on about, organization B that did something to us 25 years ago. Let's realize what moment we're in and the seriousness of it and come together in real principled unity.
I would just say, everyone, if you're labor union members here, engage in your union to make sure that your union is doing education programs, especially around democracy and how we fight back to protect our democracy. And to continue looking for opportunities to demonstrate that our system was hijacked by Donald Trump, not to advance the interests of working people, but for the oligarchs. And if you have not yet, I'm sure most of you have, but please make sure to find a volunteer opportunity to make sure Elon Musk does not steal that Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin. We've got an election coming, I think it's like in 10 days. So if you haven't volunteered yet, there's a lot of volunteer opportunities to phone bank, Wisconsin.
On the popular education, political education piece, that's something I've been thinking a ton about, and how do we do it at scale? So I definitely think working groups are a great idea. They can actually turn into coalitions, if you actually do invite community members in too. That's how our Boston Education Justice Alliance actually here grew. And then, we've been trying to create materials that can be adopted. So that's like 10-minute meetings. I presented that actually to our AFT state fed presidents just a couple days ago, or was that yesterday? And sharing resources, because not any one of us are going to be able to solve all the problems. But if we're creating community, talking to each other, sharing resources, sharing ideas, and thinking big, that last question was a big question, but we do need to think big and outside of the box, and keep our eye on what are we working towards, what kind of vision do we believe should exist, because if we're not thinking about what we're fighting for too, then I think we're going to miss the opportunity to bounce back stronger as a better democracy, because the current democracy wasn't working either.
Thank
But
you so much.
everyone has a role to play, and everyone has some skill or talent that they can bring to the movement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Jamala, Jessica, and Shane. This was a fantastic conversation. We're going to continue discussing these themes May 8th and 9th at a conference here at CUNY SLU. Thank you all for joining this webinar. Thanks to our CUNY staff for hosting us, and thanks for all everyone is doing to save this democracy and make it better than what we started with. Thanks again to our panelists, and everyone take care.